Hey there, deep diver. So it seems like you are really ready to get into some of the hugest questions out there.
Yeah,
The kind that philosophers have been thinking about for centuries, right?
that's right.
Yeah, we're talking metaphysics and epistemology and ethics,
Yeah.
like the whole thing. And you shared some fascinating articles and notes, and I'm excited to dig into those with you today.
Yeah, it's always so exciting to see somebody diving headfirst into these fundamental concepts, you know?
Yeah,
They might seem abstract at first, but they really do get to the heart of how we understand ourselves and the world around us, you know?
absolutely. And speaking of the world around us, let's just jump right into metaphysics,
Let's do it.
shall we?
Yeah.
This is where we get into the nature of reality itself,
Yeah.
what's real and what exists and how it all fits together.
Yeah, and you specifically highlighted an article about the ethics of AI,
Right.
which is interesting because it actually connects to one of the core puzzles in metaphysics, the problem of universals and particulars.
Okay. That sounds a little complex.
It is.
Could you unpack that a bit for us?
Yeah, so think about it this way. We talk about things like justice or fairness as if they're real tangible things,
Yeah.
but are they really?
Yeah.
Do they exist independently or are they just concepts that we humans created, you know?
Hmm. I see what you mean that we all want a just legal system.
Yeah,
But what does that actually mean?
exactly.
Is it just a bunch of individual actions, or is there some kind of overarching principle of justice
Right.
that's guiding it all?
Yeah, and it gets even trickier when you apply this to AI
Mm.
because we're trying to program these machines to be ethical, but if there's no universal good or bad, how do we even begin to do that?
Right.
What are we even asking those AI systems to do?
That is a really, really big question.
Yeah.
It seems like metaphysics is really forcing us to confront how much of what we perceive as real might just be a product of our own minds.
It really does. Yeah, and that leads us nicely into another metaphysical conundrum.
Okay.
The nature of causation and determinism.
Okay.
You know, in your notes, you mention struggling with a career decision.
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe you have complete free will to choose your path?
Oh.
Or is everything predetermined by factors beyond your control?
Whoa, that hits close to home.
Yeah.
To be honest, I go back and forth on that one all the time
Yeah.
because if everything's predetermined, then does that mean my agonizing over this decision is just for show?
Right, exactly. And it raises the question of whether we're truly the authors of our own lives
Right.
or just actors following a script we didn't write. And if we don't have free will, can we be held morally responsible for our actions?
That's heavy stuff.
Yeah, it is.
And you're telling me that metaphysics goes even deeper than this?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It even tackles the nature of time itself.
What?
Yeah.
Well-
You know, do you think of time as a straight line? Or is it
Yeah.
something more complex, maybe even cyclical?
Wow.
I mean, some physicists are even proposing that time may not even flow in a straightforward way. But that's a whole other deep dive.
Okay, my brain officially needs a break.
Yeah.
But before we do, can we shift gears to epistemology?
Sure.
We've talked about what might be real,
Yeah.
but how do we even know anything for sure?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question.
Right.
Epistemology digs into how we acquire knowledge, how we justify our beliefs, and whether we can ever be truly certain about anything.
And this actually connects to the article you sent about fake news and misinformation.
Yeah.
In this day and age, it feels like everybody has their own version of the truth.
Mm-hmm.
So how can we even begin to sift through all that and figure out what's real?
Well, that's where the problem of skepticism comes in.
Okay.
You know, some skeptics take this to the extreme. They doubt the existence of the external world altogether.
Wow.
But even moderate skeptics raise some valid points about the limitations of our senses.
Yeah.
You know, the potential for bias and the difficulty of proving anything with absolute certainty.
It's like that saying, you can't believe everything you read on the internet. But how do we determine what is trustworthy and what's not?
Well, one approach is to focus on the process of justification, you know?
Okay.
Instead of seeking absolute certainty,
Right.
we look for evidence, we weigh different perspectives, and we form beliefs based on the best available information.
So it's less about having all the answers
Yeah.
and more about
Yeah.
being critical thinkers and evaluating information carefully
Yeah.
and being open to changing our minds when presented with new evidence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is especially relevant to the sources you shared about political polarization.
Right.
You know, if everybody's retreating into these echo chambers and only consuming information that confirms their existing beliefs, how can we have productive conversations
Mhm.
and make progress on important issues?
Yeah, you've hit on something really crucial there, the ability to Not just consume information, but also evaluate it critically.
Right.
It's like we need a whole new set of skills for navigating this information-saturated world.
We really do. Absolutely. And that's actually something we'll touch on more when we dive into logic and critical thinking.
Okay.
But first, let's explore another fascinating facet of epistemology, the role of perception.
Okay, so how does the way we perceive the world through our senses actually give us knowledge? I remember that article you mentioned about optical illusions.
Yeah.
It really made me question whether I could trust my own eyes.
Right. Well, it turns out our senses aren't always reliable.
Yeah.
They can be influenced by all sorts of factors, from our individual biology to our cultural upbringing.
Wow.
We don't experience the world raw,
Right.
but rather through a filter of pre-existing beliefs and expectations and interpretations.
Looks like we're all wearing these metaphorical glasses that are shaping how we see the world.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And we might not even be aware of it.
Wow.
And this leads us to the question of whether there's an objective reality out there, or if everything is subjective, just a matter of individual interpretation.
Whoa. That's a big one. And I'm guessing that's where things start to get really messy.
Yeah.
Because if everybody's reality is different, how can we even begin to communicate and understand each other?
Well, that's where things get really interesting and where ethics comes into play.
Okay.
How do we navigate a world where different people have different moral frameworks and different ideas about what's right and wrong?
Okay.
That's a conversation we'll delve into next.
Okay. I'm definitely ready for that deep dive. This is getting really fascinating.
Good.
And I can already see how all these ideas are connecting to the things I've been reading and thinking about.
That's the beauty of philosophy. It's all interconnected, and it has this amazing ability to illuminate our everyday experiences in new and surprising ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's dive into the world of ethics.
Yeah.
Now, you had mentioned that you were grappling with some ethical dilemmas at work.
Yeah.
And I think this is the perfect time to explore that.
It sounds like, ethics can feel very personal, but it really does also operate on a larger societal scale.
Exactly. And one of the articles you shared, there was this whole debate about moral relativism.
Right.
Which basically argues that there's no universal right or wrong.
Yeah.
That it all depends on cultural norms and individual perspectives.
Yeah.
But doesn't that make it impossible to judge any action as objectively good or bad?
Well, that's the crux of the debate,
Yeah.
Moral relativism makes it challenging to condemn actions that we intuitively feel are wrong.
Right.
Even if they're accepted in other cultures,
Yeah.
It forces us to ask whether our own moral compass is based on solid principles or just cultural conditioning.
Yeah, it's like that classic example of certain cultures practicing cannibalism.
Yeah.
It might be part of their traditions.
Yeah.
But most people outside those cultures would find it morally repugnant. So how do we reconcile those conflicting viewpoints?
It raises the question of whether there are fundamental moral truths that transcend cultural differences, or if morality is truly just a matter of perspective. And this connects directly to your work dilemma. You mentioned feeling conflicted about a decision that could benefit the company but potentially harm a small group of people.
Mm.
If you lean towards moral relativism, the decision might be easier, but if you believe in a universal moral code, the stakes become a lot higher.
It definitely makes things more complex. I'm trying to weigh the potential benefits against the potential harm.
Right.
But how do I even begin to measure those?
Yeah.
It's not like there's a simple equation for ethical decision-making.
Unfortunately, there isn't. And this is where the idea of moral dilemmas comes in.
Okay.
Often there's no clear-cut right answer.
Right.
Just different shades of gray.
Yeah.
You have to weigh competing values and consider potential consequences and make the best decision you can with the information you have.
It sounds like ethics is more about navigating those gray areas, those tough choices, where there's no easy solution, rather than simply following a set of rules.
That's a great insight. It highlights the importance of developing critical thinking skills,
Mm-hmm.
which is where logic comes in.
Right.
You mentioned in your notes that you wanted to learn more about how to construct sound arguments and identify fallacies.
Yes, I keep seeing all these arguments online that feel so misleading,
Yeah.
but I can't quite put my finger on why. I'd love to be able to call out those logical fallacies and build stronger arguments myself.
Yeah. That's a valuable skill, especially in today's world. Logic helps us cut through the noise and evaluate information objectively.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start with identifying common fallacies.
Okay.
Have you ever encountered an ad hominem attack?
I think so. Isn't that when someone attacks the person making the argument,
Yeah.
instead of addressing the argument itself,
Right, exactly.
like dismissing someone's opinion on climate change just because they work for an oil company or something?
Exactly. It's an attempt to discredit the person rather than engage with their ideas.
Right.
Another common one is the straw man fallacy. Have you ever felt like someone was misrepresenting your argument
Oh, yeah.
to make it easier to attack?
All the time. It's so frustrating when someone twists your words
Right.
or puts words in your mouth to make you sound unreasonable.
Right. That's the straw man fallacy in action.
Ow.
They're essentially building a flimsy version of your argument
Okay.
so they can easily knock it down.
Right.
And then there's the slippery slope fallacy, which claims that one action will inevitably lead to a series of increasingly negative consequences, even if there's no evidence to support that chain of events.
Oh, like the argument that if we legalize marijuana, then everyone will start using harder drugs.
Precisely. You know, it's a fear-mongering tactic that often lacks logical grounding, but logic isn't just about debunking bad arguments.
Right.
It's also about constructing sound ones.
Okay.
Do you remember that article you sent about the philosophy of art?
Yes. I found it fascinating how it explored the idea of beauty as a subjective experience. Yet there seem to be some universal principles in aesthetics that hold true across cultures.
That's a great observation, and it highlights a key point. You know, we often think of logic as being cold and calculating,
Yeah.
but it also plays a role in our appreciation of art and beauty. You know, aesthetics is about understanding how art impacts us emotionally, how it communicates ideas, and how it reflects the cultural values and beliefs of its creators.
It's like art speaks a language that goes beyond words, appealing to our senses and emotions in ways that logical arguments often can't.
Think about a piece of music that moves you deeply.
Yeah,
Can you logically explain why it evokes those emotions?
that's true.
You know, it might be difficult, but that doesn't make the experience any less real or meaningful.
It's like trying to explain the feeling of love.
Right.
You can try to break it down into its constituent parts, but it ultimately transcends any logical explanation.
Yeah. And that leads us nicely into the realm of political philosophy.
Okay?
You know, you shared some articles about different political ideologies.
Right.
And I think it'd be fascinating to explore how these connect to the concepts we've been discussing.
Yes. I'm particularly interested in the idea of justice. Like, how do different political systems define what's just? And how do those definitions influence the way those societies are structured?
That's a great question. Political philosophy grapples with those fundamental questions about justice and equality and freedom.
Right.
You know, it examines different political ideologies like liberalism, conservatism, socialism, and anarchism, each with its own perspective on how those values should be manifested in society.
It's like trying to figure out the best way to organize a society so that everyone has a fair shot at a good life.
Yeah.
But with so many different perspectives on what fair even means,
Right.
it seems like an impossible task.
It is a complex challenge, and there's no easy answer, you know?
Okay.
Political philosophy helps us understand the strengths and weaknesses of different political systems.
Yeah.
It encourages us to engage in thoughtful discussions about how to create a more just and equitable society.
And with all the challenges facing the world today, like climate change and economic inequality and political polarization, it feels more important than ever to have those difficult conversations
It does.
and try to find solutions that work for everyone.
Absolutely. And it's not just about finding solutions on a global scale, you know?
Yeah.
Political philosophy also encourages us to examine our own beliefs and actions, to
Right.
consider how we contribute to the kind of world we want to live in.
It's like that saying, be the change you want to see in the world.
Exactly.
But instead of just a catchy phrase,
Yeah.
it's a call to action to engage with these big ideas and put them into practice in our daily lives.
Exactly. And that brings us to another fascinating branch of philosophy that we haven't touched on yet, the philosophy of mind.
Oh, philosophy of mind. What's that all about?
Well, in simple terms, it explores the nature of consciousness thought and the relationship between the mind and body.
Okay.
It delves into questions like, what does it mean to be conscious? And how do our physical brains give rise to our subjective experiences?
That sounds incredibly complex.
Yeah.
And I can already see how it connects to some of the other concepts we've been discussing,
Yeah.
like the problem of skepticism and the role of perception in shaping our understanding of reality.
You're right. It all ties together beautifully. And with the rise of artificial intelligence, the philosophy of mind is becoming even more relevant.
How so?
Well, if we're trying to create machines that can think and feel like humans, we need to understand what those processes even entail.
Right.
What is consciousness exactly? Can a machine truly be conscious, or is that something unique to biological organisms?
Hmm.
These are questions that philosophers have been grappling with for centuries,
Hmm.
and they're now taking on even greater urgency as technology advances.
It's both exciting and a little bit terrifying to think about the implications of creating conscious machines.
Yeah.
It raises so many ethical and philosophical questions.
It does, and those are exactly the kinds of questions that philosophy helps us explore.
It feels like we've only just scratched the surface of all these fascinating ideas.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you think we should touch on before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think we've covered a lot of ground already.
We have.
From the nature of reality to the complexities of ethics, it feels like we've taken a whirlwind tour through the entire world of philosophical thought.
Yeah, and yet we've only just begun to explore the depths of these ideas,
Yeah. Right.
It's like we've opened a door to a vast library, and each book we pick up reveals even more interconnected chambers of thought.
It's really amazing how these seemingly abstract concepts can have such a profound impact on how we see the world,
Yeah.
how we make decisions, and how we interact with each other.
Yeah, that's the power of philosophy. It provides a framework for understanding the human experience,
Yeah.
for grappling with those big questions that have puzzled us for centuries.
One thing that really struck me is how philosophy encourages us to question our assumptions,
Yeah.
to challenge conventional wisdom and to constantly seek a deeper understanding.
Yeah, that's the spirit of critical thinking that we've been emphasizing throughout this whole deep dive.
Right. It's about not taking things at face value,
Yeah.
but rather digging deeper, asking why, and being open to different perspectives.
It's like we've been given a set of tools for navigating a complex world, for making sense of the overwhelming amount of information we encounter these days,
Yeah.
and for engaging in meaningful conversations with others.
Absolutely. And remember that article you shared about the impact of social media on our attention spans?
Yes, it was a
Yeah.
little bit concerning, to be honest.
Well, think about how philosophy can actually help us counteract those negative effects,
Okay.
by engaging with these complex ideas.
Yeah.
By practicing critical thinking, we're essentially strengthening our mental muscles,
Right.
our ability to focus, to analyze, and to resist those knee-jerk reactions that social media often encourages.
So instead of passively scrolling through our feeds, we can use philosophy to cultivate a more active and engaged relationship with the world around us.
Exactly.
That's really empowering.
It is. It reminds us that philosophy isn't just an academic pursuit, it's a way of life.
Right.
It's about applying these concepts to our everyday experiences,
Mm.
to the choices we make, the relationships we build, and the way we interact with the world around us.
It's about living a more examined life,
Yeah.
a life that's grounded in thoughtful reflection and ethical considerations and a genuine curiosity about the world and our place within it.
Beautifully put. And that brings us to the thought-provoking question we wanted to leave you with.
Okay.
If we could truly know another person's thoughts and feelings, would that make ethical decisions easier or more complex?
Ooh, that's a good one. It really gets to the heart of empathy
Yeah.
and the challenges of understanding different perspectives.
It also makes us consider the potential downsides of complete transparency.
Right.
Would it be beneficial to know everything someone is thinking, even their darkest thoughts or most private feelings?
Right.
Would that erode trust and individuality?
So many layers to unpack. I can already see myself pondering this one for quite some time.
That's what we hope for. We encourage you to keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep the philosophical conversation going.
Absolutely. And if this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, we encourage you to delve deeper into the specific areas that resonated with you.
Yeah.
There's a whole universe of philosophical thought out there waiting to be discovered.
And remember, philosophy isn't about finding all the answers.
Right.
It's about embracing the questions, the uncertainties, and the ongoing journey of intellectual and ethical growth.
Well said. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.
Yeah.
It's been a truly enriching experience.
The pleasure was all mine. Until next time, happy pondering.